Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. As a Michigan fan, I want to get up here and share some of my final thoughts and opinions on what we saw from this Michigan offense late Saturday night against Oklahoma. And the unique part about this conversation is look, there was so much that went wrong with the Michigan offense that you can point your finger at a lot of different things. I have some, I guess you call them unique perspectives on the real concerns that we should have regarding this Michigan offense. And it starts with this. I think many Michigan fans that follow this program closely were watching that offense late Saturday night and saying, man, this offense eerily reminds us from what we saw in 2024. From the formations that we saw, from the personnel usage that we saw, from the scheme that we saw in the route concepts, very, very similar to what we saw in 2024. And guess what? I know damn well that Kurt Campbell wasn't back in the booth calling those plays. My biggest concern here is that what's the common denominator between the Michigan offense that we saw Saturday night and what we saw in 2024? The common denominator is head coach Shrrone Moore. And this is not me getting up here and saying Shrrone Moore should be on the hot seat or that Michigan should fire Shrrone Moore. Y'all know how I feel about Shrrone Moore. I've been very vocal that I think he's doing a lot of good things with this program. Let's make one thing clear, though. Shrrone Moore is not the head coach of Michigan because of his offensive play calling. And go back to the Michigan offense in 2023 that won a national championship. Yeah, Shrrone Moore did a good job, but he also had a top 10 NFL draft pick in J.J. McCarthy. He had an offensive line that pretty much all of those guys are currently on NFL rosters. And one of the best running backs in the country in Blake Corum. Had legitimate NFL pass catchers, whether that was Colston Loveland, Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson. And he had an elite defense, one of the best defenses that we've seen in the last couple of decades. I firmly believe that. My biggest concern here is that we brought Chip Lindsey in because we thought he was the guy to run this Michigan offense at an optimal level with Bryce Underwood at quarterback. And my biggest concern is, hey, is Shrrone Moore not letting Chip Lindsey run the stuff he wants to run? Because go back and look at what we saw late Saturday night against Michigan or against Oklahoma, and go back and watch Chip Lindsey and watch the offenses that he was running at North Carolina. Completely different. Like that's not the offense that we saw Saturday was not the offense that we saw Chip Lindsey run at North Carolina. That's my biggest concern is that, hey, we have a kid like Bryce Underwood who is, and that's another conversation that maybe we can just have now. There's a lot of Michigan fans that are really concerned that we're going to have the same season that we had in 2024. Look, there's a stark difference. Last year we had miserable quarterback play, and you couldn't just snap your fingers and get better quarterback play. This year in 2025, we know one thing dang for sure. That's Bryce Underwood is a very talented quarterback that is probably only going to get better as the season goes on in 2025, but you have to let him cook. I mean, you have to treat Bryce Underwood like he's the talent that he is. And you go back and watch that team Saturday night on offense and say, we are treating Bryce Underwood like he was a backup quarterback, not like a difference maker. That's my biggest concern. And look, am I getting up here and saying the offensive line was great, or saying that Bryce Underwood was great, or saying that the wide receivers were great? No, absolutely not. We'll evaluate each of those position groups as this episode goes on. But there are a lot of people that are getting up here and saying the offensive line stinks and the wide receivers stink. My biggest concern about what we saw from the offense is that it just reminded me too much of how we ran the offense in 2024. We brought Chip Lindsey in for a reason. Let Chip Lindsey do his thing. That's my biggest concern. Want to get into evaluating a little bit more what we saw, the biggest problems that we saw from a schematic standpoint. Before we get into it, as always, to the Michigan fans, here's the thing. Whether you agree or disagree with some of these takes, I would love to hear from you in the comment section. That's the most unique part about it is you can watch that football game and have a lot of different concerns. This happens to be my biggest concern. Would love to hear from you guys. Appreciate you. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, from a result standpoint, the biggest concern I have is 66 yards after the catch is inexcusable for this Michigan offense. One of the best ways, at least in my opinion, to evaluate an offensive coordinator and an offensive scheme is how many yards you're able to generate after the catch. Why do I use that as a metric? Because every good offense has ways to get the football to their playmakers in space. 66 yards after the catch, like that's telling me we are getting the football to our players in space. Not enough, not nearly enough. Outside of those first two drives, the yards after the catch was extraordinarily low. And so that's one of the things that when you're looking at it, we got to figure out unique ways to get Samaj Morgan the ball in space and let him operate after the catch. Because every time we tried to go to Samaj Morgan, there wasn't a lot of space that was generated normally. That's one of my biggest concerns that we saw evaluating Bryce Underwood. Look, it's no secret Bryce Underwood was not very good Saturday night. There is some context that you have to keep in mind. This is an Oklahoma defense that has a ton of NFL talent that's been working for Brent Venables for the last 3 years. And let's not forget that Brent Venables, you can say what you want about what he's doing as a head coach at Oklahoma. He was calling the defense Saturday night. And he is one of, if not the best, defensive play caller that we've seen in college football in the last decade. It was a mismatch from the jump. A true freshman making his first career start on the road, going up against a talented Oklahoma defense that was being called by one of the greatest that we've seen calling defenses. My biggest, and again, it's kind of hard to, and that's my biggest frustration about what we saw. And I said this on Sunday morning. My biggest frustration is it's kind of hard to evaluate Bryce Underwood because we didn't give him enough opportunities to be a difference maker. I would be much happier breaking down that Michigan loss if we died on our sword. Said, hey, Bryce Underwood, we treated him like a difference maker, made a couple of freshman mistakes. That's why we lost on the road to Oklahoma. Instead, we're sitting here on a Tuesday afternoon saying, how do you even evaluate what Bryce Underwood did? Because you didn't really give him the opportunity to be the difference maker that we brought him in to be. I want to evaluate the offensive line next. This is the biggest talking point because, look, am I getting up here and saying the offensive line was great in this football game? No, absolutely not. You can go to some of the PFF grades. They're not as bad as a lot of Michigan fans might think. And upon rewatching the game a couple of times myself, on Saturday night, it felt like the offensive line got their tail whipped. And there were certain reps that are circulating on Twitter that show the offensive line got their tail whipped. There were a lot of reps that I think the Michigan offensive line was just fine. I think the bigger problem here was that Brent Venables blitzed 65% of the offensive snaps that Michigan dropped back and threw. I don't think we did a good enough job giving the Bryce the opportunity to have quick answers to pressure. And so, yeah, it looks like there's a lot of pressure on Bryce, and there was a lot of pressure on Bryce. A lot of that pressure was because Oklahoma was sending 5, 6, 7 guys. I mean, they were playing a lot of cover zero in the second half and saying, hey, can these wide receivers win on the outside? And a lot of the route concepts didn't really get open quick enough for Bryce Underwood to get the ball out and have any answers. Here's a really good example of some of my frustration here. And we're not going to go through the whole game and review it, but we're saying, hey, the offensive line stunk. I just don't know if that's a totally fair evaluation to make. We're sitting here 3rd and 6. We're down 2 scores. We're inside the 30. There is not an offensive line in the country that can run the football into the kind of box Oklahoma is showing us and run the ball successfully. You run this play out. We're running right into this. This is a numbers game, right? You can look how much space that you have to the bottom of your screen to your playmakers. We're going to look at this look that Oklahoma's given us, and we're going to run the football right into it. And look, the offensive line's moving bodies. I think the offensive line is creating some movement along the line of scrimmage here. We end up gaining 4 yards. That is not a bad run considering the box Oklahoma was showing. The biggest frustration I have about this play in this calling sequence, you might say, is why were you running it on 3rd and 6 and you get 4 yards, you get it to 4th and 2, and then you turn around and kick a field goal? That is a play call that's designed to say, hey, we're going to try to get 4 here, create a 4th and 2, and then we're going to go for and try to extend this drive. Instead, we kick the field goal. I look at it and say that this offensive line, especially the tackles, Andrew Sprague, Evan Link, I didn't think they were all that bad. I think Brady Norton struggled a little bit. I think when Giovanni El Hadi went down, maybe we struggled on the inside a little bit more. I don't think the offensive line was, and again, I think there are Michigan fans that'll disagree with that. And I think that's okay. There's a lot of different ways to evaluate what went on. To me, the offensive line on the list of concerns that I have about this Michigan offense and what we saw, it's not at the top of the list. Evaluating the pass catchers, that's another kind of conversation we can get into. When we gave our pass catchers chances down the field, good things happened a decent amount. Right? I mean, Bryce Underwood gives Donovan McCulley a chance to go make a play one on one. Donovan McCulley makes the play. I don't think our pass catchers created separation early enough in some of these route trees. I think you can also put that on some of the concepts that we saw them run. My biggest issue is, once again, we're sitting here trying to evaluate the offense and say, well, shoot, I don't know how to evaluate the pass catchers because we didn't give them enough chances to go out and make plays. It's going back to how we started this thing, and that is, this offense reminded us of 2024, and it's hard to score points running the offense that we ran in 2024. I understand why we ran that offense in 2024 because we didn't have any good quarterback play. When you have a quarterback like Bryce, you have to treat him like a difference maker. The biggest takeaway from this game is there was one offensive coordinator, Ben Arbuckle, who treated his quarterback John Mateer like a difference maker, and John Mateer made difference making plays. There was another offensive coordinator, Chip Lindsey / Shrrone Moore, that treated Bryce Underwood like a backup quarterback. And it's hard to win games against really good football teams when you're running that kind of offense. A lot of different spots where you can point blame. To me, the biggest concern is how much influence does Shrrone Moore have on this offense? And it feels like we're bumping heads a little bit. Chip Lindsey's got his stuff that he wants to run. Shrrone Moore maybe wants the offense to look like this. That should have been figured out before we hired Chip Lindsey. Because if we're going to be butting heads all year, that's going to be a problem. It's going to be a big problem. That's my biggest concern. Again, am I ready to give up on this offense in 2025? Far from it. I'm going to be dialed in every single game. One, because I'm a Michigan fan, but number two, because I do think there are reasons to believe this offense can get better, but it starts with treating your quarterback like the difference maker we brought him in to be. That's just not what you saw. On the defense side of the football, the more I rewatched that game, was it perfect from the defense? No. Did they miss some opportunities to really change the game? Absolutely. Got to be better on third down. But the fact of the matter is, with how much Michigan just couldn't stay on the field, the amount of opportunities John Mateer had, when you give John Mateer the amount of opportunities Michigan gave him, well, shoot, he gonna find ways to make plays, and that's exactly what you saw, right? Again, a lot of things you can point your finger at. To me, the biggest issue is it feels like we might be bumping heads a little bit between Shrrone Moore and Chip Lindsey. We'll see how this Michigan offense changes. Again, you got an opportunity to fix some of the stuff against Central Michigan. Better be on your P's and Q's against Nebraska. That's again, you're going on the road. You got to play well on offense if you want to win that game. There's an opportunity for the ball to get rolling. Or at least I'm just going to be keep telling myself that until it starts to get rolling. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.